If you thought that Peter Jackson and company took a lot of liberties with The Lord of the Rings, then oh boy, you will hate this one. To get right into it, we have Azog the Defiler, who is nowhere to be found in the original book. However, he is a figure who showed up when Tolkien deepened his world later. This film shows us a flashback where the exiled dwarves of Erebor try to reclaim the kingdom of Moria from the orcs. In this battle, Azog kills and beheads King Thror. In the actual history of Middle-earth, Thror did set his sights on Moria, but he went in alone, expecting to be welcomed back as the rightful heir. His head was tossed back out with Azog's name carved into it. Thorin never got retribution for this like he does in the film, although this is understandable from the movie's perspective. Azog was chosen to serve as the main villain for this one since Smaug doesn't appear until the second film. The problem is that we don't really know why he wants to wipe out the line of Durin. However, this lack of motivation is made up for by his rivalry with Thorin, which works because they both have taken something from each other. Additionally, having Bilbo save Thorin's life at the end was a good way of keeping him involved while also advancing their friendship. All of this was added by Peter Jackson and the other writers when, in the books, Azog was really killed by Dane Ironfoot. Oh, whoops. Sorry, but I may have just given away a pivotal scene in the final movie. Feel free to castigate me in the comments section, but I find it hard to believe that comedian Billy Connolly would be able to best Manu Bennett in close combat. Let me be clear, a movie does not necessarily have to follow its source material narratively in order to be a good film or even a good adaptation. What has always been important to me is how well the filmmakers stick to the essence of what they're adapting, how much passion that they have for the material, and if the finished product is entertaining in its own right. For instance, I cannot tell you how many times I've criticized the Hunger Games movies and gotten this back as a response. Oh, well, you should have read the book. No! A movie should be able to stand on its own as a self-contained visual medium without forcing the audience to read a book in order to enjoy it. The Hammer horror films took all kinds of liberties with the source material, but many of them, including the sequels, still maintained the central themes of their respective books while crafting new stories around them. Now, your appreciation for a particular film or TV show could potentially be greatened by having background knowledge of its source material, but one of the primary objectives behind adapting something to the screen, aside from making money, is to bring it to a wider audience. I would rather a movie be a good movie by itself than follow a book verbatim and alienate the uninitiated with a slew of unfamiliar terms, settings, and characters. When that happens, you get something like Dune. With that said, the question has been raised about whether The Hobbit: An Unexpected Journey is really faithful to its own source material, or if it's just trying to copy and ride the success of The Lord of the Rings. Well, right from the beginning, there was an interesting dilemma. In order to tell a more complete version of the story, Jackson and the other writers looked to the appendices, a section in The Return of the King where Tolkien basically laid out the history and cultures of Middle-earth. In the original Hobbit book, Gandalf periodically leaves on other business. The reader never gets a clear idea of where he goes, but it provides Bilbo with the chance to take charge and prove his worth. Tolkien later filled in the blanks in the appendices, having Gandalf dealing with the sinister fortress of Dol Guldur. However, by this point, Tolkien had essentially reimagined his fictional world to be darker and more detailed than it was portrayed in The Hobbit, hence why adapting it to the big screen while incorporating the appendices was such a challenge. As a result, the filmmakers tried to find a balance between the lighthearted adventure aspect and the darker storyline. Everything involving the necromancer is taken very seriously, while the scenes with the dwarves range from noble and heroic to just plain goofy. This goes back to these two plot lines feeling somewhat irrelevant to each other, which could potentially lead to some jarring tonal inconsistency. Although certain scenes seem to shift tones in the blink of an eye, it's still impressive that Jackson and his fellow writers managed to blend the light and dark stuff as well as they did, especially in the extended edition. Here, the extra scenes place more of an emphasis on Bilbo, showing him interact with his fellow hobbits and later marvel at Rivendell, the place where he will eventually spend his retirement. On top of that, this version of the film features more songs. Bofur sings The Man in the Moon, which was recited by Frodo in the Fellowship of the Ring book, and the Great Goblin gets a more extravagant introduction with his opening number. When all is taken into consideration, though some of you may disagree, I honestly think that this is still a faithful adaptation of the source material. Hear me out on this. The overall mood is lighter than any of the Lord of the Rings films. Whereas the battle scenes in the previous movies were very grounded and gritty, for the most part, the action scenes here are fast-paced and fun. Many of the Fellowship's conversations were very serious and somber, but the dwarves act like a bunch of silly siblings who occasionally bicker but often enjoy each other's company. The color scheme is more vibrant, and there are also several human moments, like Bilbo learning when to take or spare a life, that harken back to the smaller scale of the book. In that sense, while it's certainly not a perfect film and doesn't quite match The Lord of the Rings, the inviting atmosphere and sense of adventure still make The Hobbit an unexpected journey, an exciting prequel, a worthy adaptation of its source material, and a very enjoyable spectacle in its own right.